Hello and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I am your host, Casey Ruff, and today we are with my favorite co-host, Bethany Ruff. Bethany, welcome to the show.
Hello, hello.
So glad you took some time out of your very busy day to do this interview. I'm so excited for this one. I think you guys are going to learn a lot. So let's introduce our guest. Our guest is Dr. Mark Cucuzzella. Dr. Mark Cucuzzella is a family medicine doctor working in West Virginia. He discovered the low-carb diet in 2012 and has been using it successfully with himself and his patients ever since. He is a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Air Force, where he designs fitness programs. As an avid runner, he has completed over 100 marathons and ultramarathons. He is the author of the book, Run for Your Life, which he wrote in 2018. He owns the running store Two Rivers Treads, which focuses on selling minimalist running shoes, and that today is where we are going to start, at the site of the feet. Dr. Mark Cucuzzella also has the amazing distinction of being our first ever repeat guest coming back onto the show, very gracious with his time. So Dr. Mark Cucuzzella, welcome to the show.
So I would love to dive right in and start to chat about the feet. So I've been doing a type of structural integration, connective tissue release in the past 2-3 years called the Rossiter system. And I deal particularly a lot with both muscle, connective tissue, but largely fascia. So before we get started into the nitty-gritty of the feet and the structure, dysfunctions that we see as far as foot patterns and ankle patterns go, can you kind of describe to our listeners the difference between muscle and connective tissue?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we just dissected fascia away when I was in medical school, Bethany. This is just to get to the meat, so to speak. We cut through fascia to get to the organs, to get to the nerves. You separated fascia, to get a better look at the muscles. But, through my career, I'm always curious. And I think Thomas Meyer's work opened my eyes maybe about 10 years ago, just anatomy trains. And when you're looking at movement and spring and, how the body actually creates and stores and returns energy, so that's running, for example, is mostly isometric from the knee down. And all of that spring occurs from the connective tissue, which is like the Achilles, for example, is just like a monster rubber band. But if that's all inflamed and injured and dysfunctional, then you got to apply a lot more muscle power. So we're all looking for free energy. But, I'm just beginning to learn about fascia. And now I think there's much more awareness, Bethany, because there's probably $1 billion industry in fascia recovery tools now. When I was running, I ran college track in the 80s. I don't even think there was a word for recovery. That would maybe go sleep and drink beer. That's where, sit on the couch and watch football. But there was no active recovery with fascia tools or foam rolling or any of that stuff. So we've come a long way. Nutrition has such a huge component to fascia health. When we're pre-diabetic, diabetic, highly inflammatory diet, it affects our recovery.
I absolutely agree. It's such a fascinating topic. I am a huge fan of Thomas Meyer's
myself.
Chapter
on it in my book. I think it was chapter 4. Tensegrity and really the springs that move us is the fascia.
So let's talk about that a little bit. It's really interesting that the foot, ankle, the whole connective tissue system is meant to have that elastic recoil quality, that spring that you're talking about, that allows the body to kind of ebb and flow with different lengths and tensions depending on the impact, depending on the position that it's in. What goes wrong if we are designed the way that we are supposed to move? Where does the problem happen?
Yeah, I think there's multiple areas, Bethany. For one, if you decommission the foot from an early age, they never really develop proper foot function. So if we're putting kids in supportive shoes, those intrinsic 4 layers of intrinsic muscles in the feet, they're shut off. And when the feet are collapsed, then the fascia, the connective tissue, isn't in the right functional position to create that spring. And if you're listening right now, you can even do this experiment. Squeeze your toes together and kind of roll your ankles in, which is kind of the standard standing position of most people these days, and try to jump rope. And you're like, thud, right? There's no spring, right? You just hit the ground. And then go out to the playground and watch a kid, or even do this yourself. So anchor your big toes and spread all your toes really wide till you create like a tripod in your foot, so you're kind of in that nice, strong foot position. Relax your knees and then jump, so right now I was just hopping right there. So look at like Muhammad Ali back in the day, right? He could jump rope for hours, and he wasn't burning calories or using energy. He was just moving efficiently, and that allowed him to get through 12 to 15 round fights. So do that, just see how that is. So if you can jump rope, effortlessly for 15 minutes, your fascia works pretty good. If 1 minute of jumping rope gasses you, that means your muscles are working too hard, and you need to figure out why that is. Is it just weak musculature, fascia stiff, pronated foot? Get an assessment from someone like yourself. Like you can't just fix what you don't know is broken.
So almost kind of like a natural like shock absorber.
Yeah, shock and return energy. So and Dan Lieberman did the work on this in his lab. So a well-functioning human foot and ankle, it's like a super ball. Nothing returns energy, but you lose less. So if you take a super ball and you drop it to the ground, it might come up 70 or 80% of the height that you dropped it from. And a well-functioning foot, you hit the ground, right? You run and you apply force to the ground. But if it's all functioning well, you get 70% of that back. But if the foot's like locked in, dysfunctional, it's kind of like throwing a hacky sack to the ground. It's like boom, thud. And then how do you get off the ground again? That's why people got Achilles tendinosis, plantar fasciosis, calf strains. All these little muscles have to go to work to, you lose all that energy. Now you've got to recreate it. So we want to harness all that energy, make running effortless, and watch people who run efficiently, especially children. They're just springy and they're not using effort. They're smiling. It's the way it should be. But if you've lost that, it's never too late to restore it.
In your practice, what are the biggest or most common reasons that the dysfunction starts to occur? So someone, maybe one of our listeners, is identifying or relating with one of these dysfunctional foot positions, or can relate to the fact that things feel really stiff and not springy. Where did that likely start, and what's the way forward?
Yeah, honestly, I wrote a whole chapter on children's footwear. So I think it starts with what we put on kids' feet. When we're putting kids at age 2 in stiff shoes with narrow toe boxes, there was in 1908, this gentleman Hoffman, an orthopedic surgeon, wrote an article showing that in 4 weeks, you start to change the angle of the great toe of a growing foot. Back in the day, they used to do fluoroscopy in shoe stores until they became worried about too many x-rays and cancer. So they,
Wow.
you go into a shoe store and they would just shoot x-rays on you. And you'd see all of the bones and the angles. So that is an immediate deformity, caused, in medicine, we call it iatrogenesis, meaning caused by, your medical intervention. So putting a shoe on a child isn't like putting a sweater on, like a piece of clothing. No, it's a functional, developmental. It's necessary to allow the child's foot to be normal, functional. If it's cold, put something on to cover you from the ground, or you got to wear something to church. But as soon as we start decommissioning the muscles, reshaping the foot, reshaping the toes, there's 26 bones, 33 joints in the human foot. So not being an evolutionary biologist, I think there probably is 100 muscle tendon insertions. So probably each of those have some function that's important. I don't know what they all are, but when it's working well, it's all good. So when it starts, then you can't like treat any one individual part of that. It's a synchronous, part of our anatomy. It has to work in harmony with our walking, running, lateral movements.
So in your opinion, because the foot, it sounds like, needs to have plenty of space for the toes to all separate and spread, for the big toe to be able to almost kind of hook into the earth to create the arch of the foot.
Yeah.
With shoes, common footwear, in my work, it seems to be there are two very, very polarized groups of people. either the ones that are walking on Cloud Hoka brand shoes that are, their foot's all tied in. They don't feel anything from their ankle. They don't feel anything contacting underneath the sole of their foot, between the sole of their foot and the ground. And then you also have the other end of the spectrum, which are more of like your minimalist shoe, kind of barefoot people. So where do you feel like is the best place for the average person to either start or live as far as footwear goes?
Yeah, it's a great question, and there really aren't. I think media loves to say there's always two camps, right? They're like meat eaters and vegetarians, but I think we all agree that if we got rid of junk food, life would be good for most people, and then they can choose whatever they want to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
But so what is your goal? So walking around, standing, being in your kitchen, be barefoot, right, as much as you can. Balance is huge. So we balance by being flat on the ground, and proprioception, which is that neuromuscular. We've got 200,000 nerve endings in our feet. So just being able to feel the ground in a flat environment will decrease your risk of falls. If you're in a big platform, elevated, and you can't feel the ground, you're at much higher risk of fall. So, if your client is at a fall risk, they need to restore balance, and balance starts with the foot. So then you have to evaluate the foot. Are they overpronated? Are they weak? Is the big toe bent in? And can we do some corrective soft tissue work to try to restore that? But definitely kind of unmask the foot a little bit so we can feel the ground. Now, if you're running a 100-mile trail race, you need some cushion under your foot. I just ran a 100-mile trail race in November, and I wore an ultra shoe, which is flat, foot-shaped, very soft, flexible, has some rebound property, but it's not minimal. It had about, the one I used for most of the race had like 26 millimeters of stack height, but you're running on rocks for 30 hours. So yeah, you could not do that in your bare feet, so, but I've trained my foot to be able to function in different environments, so it all depends on the context. So, mix it up, just like you wouldn't go and do the same workout every day in the gym. Work on strengthening your foot. But if you're out there on a trail, you need to bomb down some hills. That's where having a little cushion can protect you. But if your movement is good, and you watch these super athletic trail runners, they could put on a very thick pair of cushioned shoes, but they still dance down the trails like it's beautiful, right? Because they're just like downhill skiers. They're just perfect. They're balanced athletes, great coordination. What I don't think helps people, so there's a misconception. So you say take a shoe like a Hoka, it has a big stack height, but it does not have a high heel to forefoot variance, meaning it doesn't have a slope. So there might be about 4 millimeter difference between the forefoot and the rear. And if we had a video here, I could show you. I have some shoe cutouts here. It's actually pretty flat. It just has protection. But then you look at a shoe like an Asics or a Nike, they tend to be elevated 1/2 inch to 1 inch, between the heel and the forefoot. And that puts your ankle in an unstable position if you're especially on a trail, because your foot is plantar flexed. And if you roll off of that, you're going to roll your ankle.
And it seems
very difficult to roll your ankle in your bare feet. Have you ever rolled your ankle in your bare feet?
Not that I can recall. It seems like any type of heel, no matter how wide you want to keep the toe box, no matter how spread apart you want to keep the toes, you're going to be pitched forward, like you mentioned in that plantar flex.
Yeah, and it affects your hips and lower back too. So if you're pitched forward, your balance is off from that also.
You guys mentioned orthotics, and when I was 14 years old, I broke my pinky and they had to put a cast on. Why do we have a cast for a broken bone that we then remove at some point so that you can make yourself stronger? Yeah, you guys mentioned orthotics, and people are given orthotics and they have to put them in every single one of their shoes for the rest of their life.
Yeah, they say wear this for you have an unstable fracture. You have to immobilize that while the body lays bone down, and then you got to rehab the area, strengthen it, because all the muscles atrophy. I've broken more than one bone in my life, just being a knucklehead boy. But so there are certain foot conditions, so if they're beyond kind of functional treatment and repair, and they have really collapsed feet and they want to run, they might need some type of orthotic, whether it's over the counter or custom, just so their feet don't completely collapse when they run. Because when they run, they're applying 2 to 3 times their body weight every step. And if their feet and muscles in the feet, the fascia is all trashed, they can't do that. So they do need some help when they run. But then when they're out walking, do the best you can to reduce the support and increase strength. I think the rehab principle, and whatever it is you're trying to recover from, is support to protect it. And then you wean support and increase strength and function. And you need a good clinician to try to direct you on what that is. You can't just go to YouTube and type in foot strengthening, because you may have a very specific issue. You might need something to adapt in certain types of footwear. We have different things in my store that help retrain the foot. One's called Barefoot Science. It puts a little stimulus in the arch of the foot, doesn't support it, but it gradually lets those muscles wake up. We have toe spacers. One brand's called Correct Toes, and they'll spread the toes out. In that big toe, I had an operation for that 20 years ago, and kind of got me into this space. My feet looked like track spikes, at that age of my life. And I was wondering why everything up the kinetic chain was broken, because my big toe was bent in at about 40 degrees. So we didn't learn this in med school, but when I hit the ground, my foot had no spring left. It had no big toe. So everything just was smash. And then I got that operated on, and knock on wood here. That was my last running injury, was 20 years ago, was an operation to correct a deformity. And I did need some type of an arch support at that period of time, because my big toe basically wasn't there. So my foot would collapse in. So when I ran, I had an arch support. I had multiple custom ones. I had over-the-counter ones. It was just but none of them ever really corrected the problem. I didn't think the custom ones were any better than, something that I got like a Superfeet over-the-counter, just to prevent my foot from collapsing in.
Let's pause right there for just a second. Sorry to interrupt you. I just want to, before we get past that, because I feel like a lot of people can really relate to that. So were you dealing with a bunion? Was it a hammer toe? Can you kind of talk about what the structure of your foot looked like and felt like leading up to that surgery? I have so many accounts of people who have undergone foot surgeries and had really horrible outcomes. So I'd love to hear about yours.
Yeah, technically it would be called a bunion deformity, or hallux valgus and hallux rigidus. So valgus is when the toe's pointing in. So if you look at a dress shoe, the shoe doesn't look like a foot, correct? It has a point. Mm-hmm. So yeah, and that's what your foot looks like. So if your shoe doesn't look like a foot, ultimately your foot's going to look like a shoe, Bethany, over years. And so we see that a lot. So bunions aren't hereditary. It's not like, well, my grandmother had this foot that looked like a dress shoe. She started wearing sensible church shoes, in third grade, and then went to work in these horrible shoes that bent the toe in, and sure enough, she's left with that. Yeah, so it takes a while to get there, but hallux rigidus is also when you have arthritis. So we need the big toe to bend, and it's called dorsiflexion, so bend up. So if you're listening to this right now, you could look down at your feet and lift your big toe up and bend it upwards about 40 degrees, and you'll see that you create an arch. So people say, "Oh, I got flat feet." It's like, no, you got dysfunctional feet. If you kind of move the big toe over and bend it up, recreate an arch in people. So they can create an arch. It's decommissioned. So that's that bunion deformity. Sometimes with soft tissue work and toe spacers, you can start to reactivate the muscles that control that big toe. It takes a little bit of practice, because most people don't like, we have an opposable thumb that we use every day. But if, I ask a patient to, lift up your big toe, or move, or, stab the ground with the big toe, it takes them some cognitive thought. Mm-hmm. They're like, okay, they really have to think, because they haven't been doing that. So they have to kind of train. There's an exercise called toe yoga, where you start to, use your toes as individual digits and recreate that neurologic connection between your brain and your foot, which we've lost. And kids running barefoot, it's unconscious, right? They haven't lost it. So they're just doing this without even knowing it. Their foot works like a spring. But yeah, so if you have that, if you look down at your foot now and it's all pointy and your big toe's bent in, go see someone who can teach you some of the non-surgical interventions. So, I think like if I had to do this again 20 years later from where I was, there was no non-surgical option 20 years ago. It was, well, you need surgery for this. And I'm like, well, I guess so. And I get surgery. But I think if it were today, I would work with soft tissue work and toe spacers and probably avoid surgery.
I love that perspective. That's really valuable for people. It's really interesting. I have people do that same drill that you were talking about earlier, pressing through the big toe. And it's almost like after years of wearing foot coffins, they can understand what I'm asking them to do, but it's like speaking a foreign language to their actual foot. And so the first pattern that I usually see is the person who hasn't been using their big toe, hasn't been using their arch and the entire inner thigh line. And so their foot tends to evert. So I've noticed a big correlation between an overpronator and an everted foot position, which then obviously has tons of dysfunction up the kinetic chain.
Oh, all the time. We use these insoles to try to retrain the foot. And then even I'm standing up now at a stand-up workstation. And then, as people are standing, they can do short foot posture, anchor the big toe and spread out all 5 toes. And I'm kind of doing that right now. And I'm creating an arch, instead of having my feet collapsed. And most people aren't even aware of it. I think, what the most important thing you probably do, Bethany, is make them aware. I have a model of a foot here, and so many people, I should just show what talar neutral is, the bone in the talus in the mortise of the ankle. So when that bone is collapsed in, their foot's not working well. And then I get them to feel that bone and then feel it come neutral. And okay, that's the position you want your foot in right there. And they're like, oh, that's weird. And then, you're kind of resupinating your foot, so the foot's overpronated, meaning rolled in, and you're kind of teaching yourself to kind of resupinate that foot. But then they're aware of it. If they're not aware of it, they don't know what to correct. It's like when, Casey and I were talking about the pre-diabetics, they're not aware at all that their sugars are going up all day, like a roller coaster. And then when you make them aware of it, put a continuous glucose monitor or something, you're like, oh, that's interesting.
And it seems really interesting, just again, talking about fascia, the retinaculum of the ankle almost kind of cross wraps and weaves. So you might find a fascial adhesion on one of the two sides, either the medial or lateral malleolus. And that is going to drastically impact either your anterior tibialis or your peroneal ligament, which ultimately will shift the placement of the knee. So do you, in your clinical setting, do you work with the feet and the knees? Do you integrate the joint above?
Yeah, well, I think, it all depends on what their initial symptom is, if it's plantar fasciosis, but the knee's like the kid in the middle. So when you film people running, if the knee caves in, it's never a knee problem. The knee's just reacting to what the foot and the hip are doing. So when the foot collapses in, it brings the knee with it. If the hips, glute medius is weak, it brings the knee with it when you land. But most people who run and they have that knee valgus, so to speak, meaning the knees collapse in, I see it's more of a foot issue. When you actually slow people down at like 200 frames a second, what gives first, the hip or the foot? And all these folks are doing tons of core work and hip work. They got plenty fine hips, plenty strong hips, but when the foot goes, it takes the knee with it. So fix the foot and everything up the chain tends to correct itself. So focus on the feet first. That's your interface with the ground. Any kind of walking, running, jumping type of sport, when people non-contact ACL injuries, which are just off the charts, especially in female athletes, a little wider hip, they just land from a rebound, boom. That should not happen.
So as far as the overpronation versus oversupination, just for our listeners, if they're not sure, if they can't picture what that looks like, can you describe what an overpronator might look like? Maybe common things that you would also find as far as knees, hips, maybe shoulders, and like head position versus an oversupinator?
Yeah, so there's a safe range. So pronation and supination aren't diseases. They're normal functions of the feet. So we hit the ground, our foot acts like a shock absorber, right? So the foot pronates a bit, meaning it kind of rolls in a little bit, meaning that if you feel your ankle, you got the knuckles on the outside and the inside. So that inside knuckle's going to roll in a little bit. Now, if that's controlled, with well-functioning fascia, which are the springs of the foot, posterior tib tendon and all those 4 layers of muscles, your foot's going to roll in, but that's a good thing. That's loading the spring. It's not uncontrolled. It's completely controlled. If you look at a world-class canyon runner, when they land, that little knuckle on the inside of the ankle is like on the track. They're rolled in. And if they were at a standard running shoe store, they would probably put them in an orthotic. But then you back away and you say, well, wait a minute, that person just set the world record. But that's not the client we see often. It's uncontrolled, meaning when they're standing there in your office or in the store, their feet are rolled in. And then when they hit the ground, that motion is just exacerbated and it's not controlled. There's no spring to it. It brings the knee with it. When you watch, a high-level runner, just at the foot, their foot's rolled in mid-stance. So mid-stance is when the most forces are going through your body and your foot is directly under your center of mass. Right? So if I'm standing right now and I'm standing on one foot, this is mid-stance. And that foot's rolled in. But then if you drew a line up their leg and through their hip and then drew another horizontal line where their waist is, you'd get a perfect, just like they're climbing stairs. Right? Everything is completely aligned up the chain. But then if you look at someone who's having knee issues, you're going to see this bend, right? The knee is going to be caved inward and the hip is going to drop. And again, fatigue plays a big part of that. So when we assess people mostly, whether it's in clinics or, in a store, there's no fatigue in the body. But then, you take someone out and catch them at the end of a 5K, things look different. So we also have to, if everything looks really good at a rested state or an unfatigued state, but they're still having injuries, they got IT band or runner's knee or, it's worth it to put some fatigue in them and see what happens. Even doing something like put them through like a 4-minute plyometric, some box jumps, and then have them just do a step down test, right? Just get a stool and have them just step down 10 times and you'll see them just be like wobbly and knee caving in, and they look pretty good when they walked in the door. And I think, if you've ever done any kind of athletic event, they have the person out there taking pictures. You'll look at yourself at like mile 1 if there's runners on this podcast, and they all know this, right? If it's that marathon photo, thing you get at the end of the race, and they got like 10 pictures, the mile 1 and then mile 25 or something, and you look like a completely different person at mile 25. It's all spring gone. It's like a disaster. That's where strength training, I think, is really important. People ignore strength training.
So what kinds of cues would you give someone who's listening who knows that they have foot dysfunction? Maybe they've been told they have plantar fasciitis or they've been prescribed orthotics or arch supports of some type. What kinds of cues would you have them running through their head? How should they be setting their feet up when they're standing? What is the ideal, position to correct into or out of?
Yeah, for a visual, so I did write a book. It's called Run for Your Life, and you can get it all places all books are sold. I have a couple chapters with tons of pictures, and then the book's website, runforyourlifebook.com, we have about 40 videos of some of these assessments and corrections and short foot posture, because it's really hard to describe it. You got to see the pictures and be able to, kind of walk it through yourself, look at your feet, and then find someone, if you have people listening who are near you, they could kind of read stuff, get some basic idea, but they probably need to see someone who can actually lay hands on them and then, okay, yeah, you're spot on. This makes sense. Go do these exercises. If people do exercises and they're not the right ones and they do them wrong, they're just wasting their time. And I think how people stand all day, so they could go do some exercises, but if they just go back in the same crappy shoes and stand with their feet rolled in all day, they're not, again, they're just wasting their time, because how you stand is how you land. If they're standing wrong all day and then they expect it to all look, really smooth and good when they're out running or jumping or CrossFit workout, it's not going to work that way. All day you should be in the right position, whether you're sitting, standing, walking, running.
It sounds like you have a much better chance at feeling what the right position is if you have a little bit more contact with the ground. Before we move past plantar fasciitis, I feel like so many people maybe have been told that they have it from a podiatrist of some sort, or maybe at a shoe store. And the other folks that I meet with at least have gotten their diagnosis from Dr. Google. What is plantar fasciitis? What truly is it? What kinds of misconceptions are there as far as plantar fasciitis goes? Common symptoms, anything that you see associated with it?
Yeah, I think just to clear terms, Bethany. So it's really not an itis. An itis is acute, meaning very rapid onset, and inflammatory, meaning like hot, red, swollen. And you probably could have acute plantar fasciitis. So say you haven't been doing much running and you've got a dysfunctional foot and you decided to go on a 10-mile trail run, and you woke up the next morning and you couldn't even touch that inner side of the heel, and it's swollen and it's bruised and it's red. That's kind of an itis. It's immediately inflamed. But osis is kind of more degenerative. So most people, by the time they decide to go seek some health care or go to a running store, they've been dealing with this for months. And they find, I better go. I'm sick of this, because every time they walk, it sucks. Their feet hurt. So it's more degenerative. So that little tissue, think of fascia like vermicelli noodles. You've got thousands and thousands of these thin strands all bundled in different strands, and they're now like thrown all over the cabinet floor. It's a mess, right? That's why they're all just foam rolling helps in some ways, because you're trying to reorganize the tissue. So it's more degenerative. That's a tough thing to get out of quickly, because it didn't take you a day to get there. So it takes weeks to get out of it, but you can't treat your way out of it. You got to fix what got you there. So if whatever repetitive motions, and you're walking and you're running and you're standing, or if the footwear was contributing to it, you could ice it, put electroshock, or do all. That's why there's like 1,000 treatments for plantar fasciosis, because if there was something that actually worked, there would probably be one treatment. Because if you got it, if you have strep throat, go get some penicillin, unless you're allergic. There's not like, widgets all over the internet, different different things that people put in their shoes, because nothing, unless you fix the cause, you can't get out of it. So fix the cause. And then, I'll use some adaptive insoles while people are re-strengthening their feet, like Barefoot Science, the correct toes. And some people who have severe plantar fasciosis, might want a little more cushion, because it really hurts to move and walk. A lot of people have really tight ankles. So if you can't get into a deep squat, like your kids, basic deep squat, if you can't get into a deep squat, your ankles are tight. And you probably assess people's squat position. A lot of people roll their ankles in a squat position, kind of cheat it that way. So if they learn good deep squat technique, lengthen the Achilles a little bit, that's a good way to work your way out of it too. Spend some time each day in the squat. Bretzel position, I think, is powerful too, is opening the hips up. When people have super tight hips, they can't extend their legs properly. It puts more tension on the plantar fascia. So we sit all day. So if we're really tight in our hip flexors, that can also lead. You got to look at the whole chain. What happens a lot of times, if you just go to a podiatrist, they look at the foot, but they don't look at anything else up the chain. So I always start with the feet, but there's, if their ankles are tight, their hips are tight, we'll work on that too. Probably, 1,000 paper cuts got them there. So you got to figure out, how do you get out of it?
I love that. Thank you for clarifying the difference between the itis and the osis. I think there's a lot of different itises in the body that are commonly misthought of as an itis, and it's something that's been going on for a while. So people expect, just like anything else can be replaced. I mean, I could throw my phone across the room and shatter my iPhone and have a new one in my hand in 15 minutes. And our bodies are not at all the same. So I feel like oftentimes if people have been dealing with foot or ankle pain or dysfunction, they come to see me. There's an expectation almost that there's a quicker fix for it. But I feel like a lot of conventional standard treatment is dealing with more of the symptom and less of the problem, the root problem, like you were describing. And another one of those that I see often is bone spurs. Can you talk a little bit about bone spurs in the feet, or heel spurs in particular?
Yeah, in essence, they're normal findings. So that's just a little calcification around the insertion of the plantar fascia. So if you see a bone spur on your x-ray, but your foot's fine, you don't have to do anything about it. And if you have plantar fasciosis and you have a bone spur, the bone spur is not causing your plantar fasciosis. It's kind of like it's at the scene of the crime, but it's, it's not the murderer, so to speak. So they're non-issues for most people to have a bone spur. Any tendon that's constantly under tension and trauma, we just, through years and years of life, we develop some calcification on those areas. So wouldn't worry about it. I would look at the functional things that are going on in the feet, putting tension, micro tears, re-injuring. The body will throw down calcium to heal whatever, fasciitis, insertional tendonitis that you've got. Just traction will have the body lay down some calcium. That's why people develop like calcifications on the Achilles, patellar tendon insertions. People will have like, if you had what's called Osgood Slaughters as a youth, which is a traction on the patellar tendon. If you're in a jumping sport at like age 13, that constant traction and constant trauma to that area, your body starts to develop kind of like a lump there. So if you break your collarbone, for example, your body's going to throw down all this calcium and you've got this big lump on your collarbone. It's there. It's not a big deal. It's a little bit unsightly for some people, but healthy bodies will lay down calcium.
That's really interesting.
Don't want your body laying down calcium in your arteries. So you do not want that. That's bad.
So I was going to ask, I'm sorry. I was going to ask about that. The same thing happens in arteries, correct?
Well, that's just calcification is soft plaques calcified. So it's different than what you would have around Achilles tendon. So there's just reparative processes that are functional and then dysfunctional. So certainly the calcification of plaques in the arteries is not a functional or good thing. We don't want to develop any calcification in the arteries. And that comes from, really trauma to the arteries from whatever inflammatory condition you've got, be it smoking or diabetes. And they cause injury to the, what's called that first endothelial lining. First steps of atherosclerosis can start happening in like 4th grade now, with all the sugar kids are eating.
So with the Osgood-Slaughters, this is news to me. I thought it was something that someone was genetically predisposed to have. That's something in childhood, in area of overuse. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, they're called traction apophysitis in the technical term. That's where large tendon areas insert into bones at growth areas, so growth plates. So that's going to be the growth plate at the tibial plateau. And, unfortunately, we have kids now at like age 10 in single sport all year, playing 3 hours of soccer practice and kicking, in hopes of that elusive college scholarship. So we're driving kids now. You're gymnasts, kids that are just like driving themselves beyond, what normal play is will get these things. But yeah, you'll see, and you actually, when you x-ray them, it looks like almost like a crack in the bone, but that's just the growth plate. But the tendon's inserting into that area, and if you're constantly jumping and traumatizing that area, you end up with this lump, and you just got to back off. That's like a true overuse syndrome. Back off, let it heal. That's where people get those little straps. People put they're called like show pat straps or, patellar tendon straps. Put a little tension on that area sometimes can relieve the pain, but it shouldn't be a ticket to go back out and do 3 more hours of jumping. Pick the extremity and there's an issue that's the same thing, but it's always the growing child who's in a single overuse environment, whether it's your elbow and you're a pitcher, knee jumping sport, on the heel. They call it severs at the Achilles tendon. People just give their names to them, but they shouldn't put disease after it. It's not a disease. Mm-hmm. I got Osgood-Slaughters disease. And if you're a parent and you didn't know that, you have an overuse syndrome of the knee, but that sounds like you've got cancer or something. Right. It's like, oh my God, I got this disease, and then they want to go get MRI scans and all this thing. You can make something that just needs 2 weeks of rest into a $4,000, medical issue.
It does seem like there's quite an industry geared towards convincing people that they have dysfunctional feet, ankles that are beyond repair. I feel like anytime I'm meeting with a new client, I see a new horrible version of a piece of footwear trudge into my space Do you feel the same? Do you see that a lot of it? I mean, I'm constantly hearing about cortisone injections, unnecessary surgeries, pins, plates, screws
Yeah.
put in the foot. It just seems so unnecessary.
Yeah, well, I think it's how I'm a doc, so we're trained to treat symptoms and we're trained in a medical model, fee for service model. So I don't make anything in the store seeing someone and telling them to strengthen their foot. I didn't do any procedure with them, you know. But certainly if I do an injection into something, I could bill $500, just it's something that takes me 3 minutes and don't put any, mind power into that, into helping that person. And they may get a short-term relief, but they're going to be right back. But that's the model. I don't think there's any intent to cause harm, but it's the model we train in. We train in a medical model, fee-for-service model. There's no incentive in our system to keep people well or to do non-operative treatment. Physical therapy is a route. So I'll get people, especially back pain, get people to therapy first, a good therapist, versus, MRI scans. None of these things have really been shown to have any efficacy. Certainly it raises costs.
What is the reason that when someone gets a cortisone injection, maybe in their foot or ankle or any joint really, why does the pain come back?
Well, a number of reasons. You didn't fix the problem. And if you inject cortisone into tendons, ultimately, so it's always mixed with some kind of lidocaine, some long-acting lidocaine. So you might get a little bit of relief initially, but cortisone weakens tendons. So we don't want to, it's illogical to be doing that in young people. Now, if you're 80 and you're just in so much pain and you just want to walk and get the mail, and maybe that could give you a little bit of pain relief, then sure. But those people are not loading their tendons. But if you're putting cortisone into an area that's going to be loaded, and this is someone who's young and active, I've never done it, and I don't see any role in that. Unless they are in such pain they cannot walk. And then you're going to do this and say, I'm going to give you this injection. I usually don't do cortisone, or if I do, it'd be a very small amount, but just to get them to start rehabbing. But certainly don't put cortisone in and go try to run 10 miles or something, or put them back in the high school basketball game.
That's a really helpful perspective. I feel like a lot of people are just trying to get themselves out of pain. And so that's really interesting for them to look at it that way, that there's, you can be putting a Band-Aid on the problem more or less, but you're going to have the same dysfunction that comes back. One of my last questions for you, do you deal with any clients who have peripheral neuropathy? Have you had many patients that have dealt with that? Do you find that, if so, do you find that it's more structurally problematic, or is that something that's more caused by diet?
It's caused by diabetes. And most people, so people are becoming pre-diabetic, which is diabetes. They're the same thing. So people develop neuropathy well before, they're told by their docs they have advanced diabetes. By the time the sugars are up in the 300-400 range, they've been hyperinsulinic. They've been on that path for years since they, loosened their first belt loop of their belly. So that hyperglycemia is toxic to the nerves. And people have spikes of hyperglycemia all day, even before diabetes. They'll shoot up their sugars to 200, then it comes down, and then they're pre-diabetic. So that's the main issue with neuropathy. B12 is an issue too. So if someone's a pure vegan, no animal products at all, we test their B12 and get them on a B12 supplement. So the B12 is robust. So yeah, prevent the diabetes, which is mostly about the food, which is mostly about processed carbohydrates, junk food, vegetable oils, which aren't vegetables. They're seed oils, highly processed seed oils. And unless you have some kind of ethical reason, religious reason not to have animal products, you need B12. Eggs are a great source of B12, especially pastured eggs. Meats, seafood, great source of B12. Cheese, good quality cheeses. So have some of that in your diet. If you don't want animal products, but will allow yourself eggs and cheese, dairy, and eggs, you'll cover most of your bases there. So some vegetarians will have eggs and cheese, so that's good. Egg is the magic food because it would become a chicken if you left it alone, to its own devices. So it's kind of a chicken in disguise. without the chicken going to chicken heaven. So yeah, yeah, it's all good, right? Yeah, they're little chickens. They lay eggs every day. There's no harm being into the chicken. Just get them from your neighbor. Don't go to one. Get them from those factory places that the chickens are just thousands of them in these little coops. No one wants that. I have egg suppliers.
Good
my
call.
neighborhood. So we're bartering things all the time. I have patients bring me eggs, texting them about eggs.
I need to start taking that as my form of currency.
It is. Oh gosh, they're gold. The eggs I get are just gold.
Be really nice to those people.
I am very nice to those people.
That's great. Well, that's really great advice on the nutrition front. This conversation has been endlessly fascinating for me to listen in on, and one that I will definitely have to listen to again to let it all sink in. We're going to ask you, what is, with all the tips and information that we talked about today, what is one simple thing that somebody could plug into their life and see benefit from regarding their feet?
Get rid of the big bulky shoes. Just start walking around barefoot. Don't let anyone tell you that that's like dangerous behavior. I mean, we've talked about food. It's like this is natural, right? Like, oh, eating eggs is dangerous. It's like, wait a minute, that's just a natural thing. We've eaten for generations. That's the most silly, nonsensical thing I've ever heard. So yeah, take your shoes off. Walk around the yard, walk around the house, get back in touch with the ground. We didn't go into earthing, but there's something magical too, just about your bare feet being on the ground and just how it makes you feel. And there's a whole science to that. That's bare feet, right? Like completely bare feet on the ground. Doesn't mean you should be running barefoot on the ground, but just take your shoes off and explore. I mean, that would be my advice. Explore, have some fun, get back in touch with the ground.
Love that. Where can people go to find your work?
With the feet, I think, if you're interested in the footwear and the things that we can do to help your foot, tworiverstreads.com. And we do Zoom fittings. You could hold your shoes up to, the screen. And we're a small business trying to stay afloat in COVID, but we'll help people. We'll even over Zoom, we help people here. tworiverstreads.com. And the book I mentioned is called Run for Your Life, runforyourlifebook.com. We'll get you a lot of those videos. And I have my own website. It's called drmarksdesk.com, doctor with a DR, marksdesk.com. But I encourage you to check out our store, get your feet strong. If you guys have clients out there, we're glad to help you. Bethany, at your practice, give us a shout. And, you're like, this person needs this type of intervention or help. We might be able to help them.
That's a very, very great resource to know about. And I have to shout out your store. I ordered my husband Casey a pair of Vivo Barefoots. Been trying to talk him into switching over to that style shoe for a while. And I ordered him
I have a pair right here.
Oh, they're great.
Right by my feet.
They're great. Yeah. And everything was, they were a Christmas present. Everything was really delayed with shipping. I sent one email to your company and they were amazing. So really great customer service.
Oh,
if
wow.
any of our listeners,
I'll pass that on.
Yeah, it was so quick. They were very, very helpful, tracking down where the order was, contacting FedEx. It was great. It was a great experience.
Wow. I'll pass. It was probably Sarah. She's my lead here. So I'll pass that on.
Way to go, Sarah. I appreciate you.
Where did she ship them to?
Salt Lake City. They were held up.
Salt Lake City.
Yeah, they were held up somewhere. I want to say in North Dakota for a few days. But everyone on your end was extremely helpful.
It was horrible around the holidays. I'm still waiting for some things.
You should talk to Sarah.
No one's going anywhere, so I don't think people mind.
That's great. Well, Dr. Mark Cucuzzella, thank you so much for being so generous with your time and your information. You always share such a wonderful message. You're somebody that we followed for a long time, and you're just a really great human. You're just fun to talk to, and we really appreciate your time and information today.
I hope you get some good skiing out there. We were out there a couple winters ago skiing.
We just have had no snow. We need to get some
Really?
snow. Yeah, not very much.
Okay.
So we'll update you when we get some snow and we'll let you know how the conditions are.
Right on. You guys have a great evening.
All right.
Thank you so much.
And this has been another really awesome episode of Boundless Body Radio. This is Casey Ruff signing off. As always, thank you so very much for listening to Boundless Body Radio. It's really inspiring and amazing to see some of the reviews that we have been getting, and also to receive so many messages and emails about how these episodes have improved our listeners' lives. And so thank you so very much. We are so happy to bring these episodes to you and provide them for free, and we really hope that they help you in your life. We have just passed 2 major milestones, which is absolutely mind-blowing to me. And basically, we did both of these in pretty much the exact same day. We have just passed 100,000 downloads worldwide of Boundless Body Radio, and we have just launched our 250th episode, which is absolutely amazing. Like I said, I never imagined we could reach that many people. We always want to keep you updated on things that we're doing on our website. So if you go to myboundlessbody.com, you can always see what we're up to. This month, we have a link that you can go and schedule a functional movement screen, which we do virtually over Zoom. A functional movement screen is a series of 7 different movements and 3 different clearing tests, which is designed to find weak links in the body, such as muscle imbalances and joint stability issues. It's a really great tool for discovering inefficient movement, and even if you're not experiencing pain in certain areas of your body, it's something that can prevent injury later on. Some muscles need to be stretched, some need to be strengthened, and we can help you create a plan around that so that you can stay healthy and continue to move well for the rest of your life. So again, you can go and schedule that at myboundlessbody.com. You will also see the other services that we offer. You can always schedule a complimentary 30-minute consultation with us to really chat about anything that you like. And remember, if you are enjoying Boundless Body Radio, please take a minute, give us a rating or review on Apple. It really helps get this passion project out to other people. And thank you again for tuning into Boundless Body Radio.